About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" In an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper, "What the foo?" Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. And this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Have you ever forgotten your phone? When did you realize you'd forgotten it? I'm guessing you didn't just smack your forehead and exclaim, "Damn," apropos of nothing. The realization probably didn't dawn on you spontaneously. More likely, you reached for your phone, pawing open your pocket or handbag, and were momentarily confused by it not being there. Then you did a mental restep of the morning's events. Shit. In my case, my phone's alarm woke me up as normal, but I realized the battery was lower than I expected. It was a new phone, and it had this annoying habit of leaving applications running that drained the battery overnight. So, I put it on to charge while I showered instead of into my bag like normal. It was a momentary slip from the routine, but that was all it took. Once in the shower, my brain got back into the routine it follows every morning, and that was it. Forgotten. This wasn't just me being clumsy. As I later researched, this is a recognized brain function. Your brain doesn't just work on one level, it works on many. Like, when you're walking somewhere, you think about your destination and avoiding hazards, but you don't need to think about keeping your legs moving properly. If you did, the entire world would turn into one massive hilarious QWOP cosplay. I wasn't thinking about regulating my breathing. I was thinking whether I should grab a coffee on the drive to work. I did. I wasn't thinking about moving my breakfast through my intestines. I was wondering whether I'd finish on time to pick up my daughter Emily from nursery after work or get stuck with another late fee. This is the thing. There's a level of your brain that just deals with routine so that the rest of the brain can think about other things. Think about it. Think about your last commute. What do you actually remember? Little, if anything, probably. Most common journeys blur into one, and recalling any one in particular is scientifically proven to be difficult. Do something often enough and it becomes routine. Keep doing it and it stops being processed by the thinking bit of the brain and gets relegated to a part of the brain dedicated to dealing with routine. Your brain keeps doing it without you thinking about it. Soon, you think about your route to work as much as you do keeping your legs moving when you walk. As in, not at all. Most people call it autopilot, but there's danger there. If you have a break in your routine, your ability to remember and account for the break is only as good as your ability to stop your brain going into routine mode. My ability to remember my phone being on the counter is only as reliable as my ability to stop my brain entering morning routine mode, which would dictate that my phone is actually in my bag. But I didn't stop my brain entering routine mode. I got in the shower as normal. Routine started. Exception forgotten. Autopilot engaged. My brain was back in the routine. I showered. I shaved. The radio forecast amazing weather. I gave Emily her breakfast and loaded her into the car. She was so adorable that morning. She complained about the bad sun in the morning blinding her, saying it stopped her having a little sleep on the way to nursery, and left. That was the routine. It didn't matter that my phone was on the counter, charging silently. My brain was in the routine, and in the routine my phone was in my bag. This is why I forgot my phone. Not clumsiness. Not negligence. Nothing more, my brain entering routine mode and overriding the exception. Autopilot engaged. I left for work. It's a swelteringly hot day already. The bad sun had been burning since before my traitorously absent phone woke me. The steering wheel was burning hot to the touch when I sat down. I think I heard Emily shift over behind my driver's seat to get out of the glare. But I got to work, submitted the report, attended the morning meeting. It's not until I took a quick coffee break and reached for my phone that the illusion shattered. I did a mental restep. I remembered the dying battery. I remembered putting it on to charge. I remembered leaving it there. My phone was on the counter. Autopilot disengaged. Again, therein lies the danger. Until you have that moment, the moment you reach for your phone and shatter the illusion, that part of the brain is still in routine mode. It has no reason to question the facts of the routine. That's why it's a routine. Attrition of repetition. It's not as if anyone could say, "Why didn't you remember your phone? Didn't it occur to you? How could you forget? You must be negligent." This is to miss the point. My brain was telling me the routine was completed as normal, despite the fact that it wasn't. It wasn't that I forgot my phone. According to my brain, according to the routine, my phone was in my bag. Why would I think to question it? Why would I check? Why would I suddenly remember, out of nowhere, that my phone was on the counter? My brain was wired into the routine, and the routine was that my phone was in my bag. The day continued to bake. The morning haze gave way to the relentless fever heat of the afternoon. Tarmac bubbled. The direct beams of heat threatened to crack the pavement. People swapped coffees for iced smoothies. Jackets discarded. Sleeves rolled up. Ties loosened. Brows mopped. The park slowly filled with sunbathers and BBQs. Window frames threatened to warp. The thermometer continued to swell. Thank fuck the offices were air-conditioned. But, as ever, the furnace of the day gave way to a cooler evening. Another day, another dollar. Still cursing myself for forgetting my phone, I drove home. The day's heat had baked the inside of the car, releasing a horrible smell from somewhere. When I arrived on the driveway, the stones crunching comfortingly under my tires, my wife greeted me at the door. "Where's Emily?" Fuck, as if the phone wasn't bad enough. After everything, I'd left Emily at the fucking nursery after all. I immediately sped back to the nursery. I got to the door and started practicing my excuses, wondering vainly if I could charm my way out of a late fee. I saw a piece of paper stuck to the door. "Due to vandalism overnight, please use side door. Today only. Overnight? What? The door was fine this morning dash." I froze. My knees shook. Vandals. A change in the routine. My phone was on the counter. I hadn't been here this morning. My phone was on the counter. I'd driven past because I was drinking my coffee. I'd not dropped off Emily. My phone was on the counter. She'd moved her seat. I hadn't seen her in the mirror. My phone was on the counter. She'd fallen asleep out of the bad sun. She didn't speak when I drove past her nursery. My phone was on the counter. She'd changed the routine. My phone was on the counter. She'd changed the routine and I'd forgotten to drop her off. My phone was on the counter. 9 hours. That car. That baking sun. No air. No water. No power. No help. That heat. A steering wheel too hot to touch. That smell. I walked to the car door. Numb. Shock. I opened the door. My phone was on the counter and my daughter was dead. Autopilot disengaged. I lived in Mesa, Arizona when I was 10 years old. We lived in a rough area, but I was just a kid completely ignorant to the dangers of the world. I was walking back home from my friend's house and my mother wanted me home by 9 and I'd always start walking back at around 8:40 to make sure I wasn't late. And it's only like a couple blocks from my house, so it wasn't a super long distance. It was around the time of year when the sun would set at 5:30 and be dark well before 7 p.m. So it was very much nighttime. As I'm walking, I hear a woman calling my name. I turn to look and see it was one of my mom's friends, but she didn't know her too well. However, I just saw that she was familiar and won't say a name, but I turned around and said hello and smiled. She walked up to me and told me my mom had called her and asked her to come get me and ride me back because something happened at my house. She said it was an emergency and that I needed to go with her and her husband, whom my family was also familiar with. I was only about 5 minutes from my house, but I was told it was an emergency and I agreed to go with her. As I'm walking, I get this weird feeling in my gut and this shaking in my legs that I now today realize was my instincts being on high alert. I stopped for a minute and asked if we could call my mom, and she said my mother was in the hospital right now and that I need to hurry. Right as we were opening the door to the car, I hear my mother shout my name as loud as she can. And I turned on a dime and quickly walked towards my mom. My mom asked what's going on, and the woman replies and says that she was just giving me a ride home because she saw me. Was not the story she gave me, so I told my mother what she told me and asked what was going on. My mom just looked at me, and she could always tell when I'm lying versus when I'm telling the truth. The woman then goes to interrupt me, likely to lie, and my mom cuts her off and just stared back at her with the most shocked look ever, and these words still send shivers down my spine. She says in the most shocked voice ever, "You were trying to take my son?" And the husband looks out the window, hurrying his wife in the car, and as I looked back towards him, I can see a syringe on the dashboard leaning against the windshield that he grabs right as I see it. She gets in the car because at that point my mom was ready to kill her and reached into her purse because she keeps a pocket knife. But they drove away, and right after they did, my mom looked at me and just burst into tears saying, "I'm almost lost you." My mom knew full well what was happening, and I was still too shaken to even say anything and just hugged her back, and we went home. I was still in denial, and to cope, I would convince myself that maybe I wasn't in any danger. My family OFC never kept in contact with any of them, but my stepdad at the time submitted a tip to the police of the incident. When they caught up with him about 3 months later, we had found out that he was arrested for having CP on his computer and found restraints in his closet, as well as some containers of propofol. They found pictures of me from my mom's Facebook downloaded on his computer as well, leading them to believe that I was actually being watched for a good bit. I never liked talking about it because to this day, if I hadn't stopped for those 10 seconds to ask the woman to call my mom, I don't know where I'd be or if I'd even be alive right now making this comment. And while it may seem like something that would have easily been forgotten, it was never the case for me. I haven't even told my closest friends this story, but I might sometime soon. I asked my mom what happened that night, why she came looking for me. She described the same feeling I remembered feeling moments before I was almost abducted, just a lot sooner than I did, and just had the instinct that I was in danger. I'm not usually a lucky person. It seems the odds are always against me, but I always remember how lucky I was that night, that my mom decided to listen to her instincts when I didn't. I've never ignored my instincts since, and every night after that, when I finally did decide to leave my house, my mom would walk with me all the way up until I turned 13 to come back to live with my dad. And that to date is the scariest thing I think I've ever experienced. It's some ***T you only hear of on the news, and nobody ever assumed it will happen to them, but my life was a mere 20 seconds from being completely different. That's it for today's dive into Reddit's dark side. Which story left you shivering? Drop a comment below and let us know. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling Reddit tales. Until next time, keep scrolling, if you dare.